I know about half of you. So my history here is back when they founded IDEA with John Haluska, those guys. I bid on the job for Epicor. Yeah, but back then it was Triad, and then it was Activant, and now it's Epicor. So I've been around the organization for 12 years with Tom Brown back there, my cohort, and Dirk Hartman over here. We've been on this thing for a long time. I've spoken at it almost every year, normally boring people with stories about how the automotive industry has organized their data and given it attributes and you can search it, thinking that I would somehow trick everybody into doing the same thing. This year, we had just gotten done merging with Epicor. And Epicor is this big, my blood's from Activant. That's where I came from. And Epicor has this big international distribution. They sell computers to manufacturers overseas who uses ERP systems is what they do. So they got all these guys that know things about the way things work overseas. And you have to tell them what you're going to say in these presentations 6 months in advance of the presentations. So at that point in time, I volunteered to give my observations on international distribution from the things I would learn from the people that I worked with at the new Epicor. So here I am 6 months later, having to fulfill that obligation, and that's what my presentation is about today. This is a picture that I took, and it's supposed to be cute because it's got the eyes, the observation and stuff, and it's moving rice down the Mekong Delta. So that was my first observation of international distribution. Was that it seemed like that wasn't a freighter with containers on it, although it's the same basic concept, just deployed slightly differently. So I'm not an expert in international distribution, which I'm sure is going to help you explain my presentation today. However, I have traveled a lot overseas, and I've seen a lot of things that actually have informed me about what things look like over there when it comes to distribution. The presentation is certainly not electrical industry specific. It's just hard to pin it down overseas, but I tried to keep that in mind. And so basically everything you're going to see is just things I've learned from the people I work with, things I've seen myself, a couple things I saw on the web. So it's meant to be an informal, and if you have any questions or care to just disagree with me, that would be fine too. Ask them at any time. So the first thing I learned were new initials. And you guys probably all know this, but the Americas, which pisses the Canadians off. But anyway, the world is broken up into these regions. If you're one of these guys who flies all over and manages the international sales team, this is what they call it. Oh, I run EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa, right? And then APAC, which is Asia Pacific, which is a real odd region because it's China, India, and then Japan. Those are the dominant voices there, right? Of course, Japan's highly industrialized, and China is emerging, and India is still relatively backwards. But they talk about these three regions all the time. So I learned those initials. That was the first thing I learned. And then the other thing I learned is that everybody I talked to when they talked about international stuff, it was always the complexity of the thing and the culture of the differences in culture of the place, the opportunities that existed, because if you look at the growth, and this would kind of be my point, I'll get to it early. If you look at the growth in gross domestic product versus the infrastructure and the way distribution is done, there's really kind of a gap. There was no mid-tier distribution like we think. You're talking about the top 250 electrical distributors. Call the first 10 giants and call everybody else mid-tier. There isn't a lot of indigenous distribution there. It just wasn't there. And I think something I should add to this slide when I think about it is partners. They talk about complexity, they talk about the culture, they talk about the opportunity, and they talk about partners, because everybody's partnering. So, because it wouldn't do right if I hadn't gone to the web and looked something up, Accenture puts this slide out in the public domain, which is like, well, so what are the most commonly experienced issues for people trying to do manufacturing or distribution business over there? And in case the font's too small, inadequate distribution, kind of gets it to 1 out of 5 people. Inadequate infrastructure, which you think would be higher, but it's gotten so much better, I think it's gone down. Weak marketing channels, cultural barriers, not that high, government regulations, no surprise, and then tailoring services to the cultural norms. So the reason I put that up was because after I'd formed my opinions, I thought I'd see if anybody agreed with me. So it's a go no go gauge. It's a test to see if I had what I heard was roughly accurate. So that's a censored version. You get to looking around at gross national products, and you realize that we all think of America as, and this is North America, you think of it as like so much bigger than everybody else. And it was. If you look at the historical charts, like these guys are down here and down here. But today, the world is basically carved up into 4 equal economic segments. North America, the Euro district, the APAC, and then ROW, which stands for rest of the world. Right? And these terms are used interchangeably. Sometimes you can put South America in here and take out of that. But oddly enough, they're all kind of like $17 trillion. So in terms of opportunity, there is a ton of opportunity outside of our market in terms of gross national product. So this is a terrible chart on this slide, and it's virtually useless at this point in time. However, I'll narrate it for you. Okay, on my laptop there, you can see obviously the eastern coast of America, Europe, and the lights of Japan, and China, India, all that stuff, and then all the dark spots are kind of the rest of the world. But since that's a terrible, I'm just going to move on. You suffer my embarrassment. Looks really good here. So, again, observation. Historically, I think of like Caterpillar as being a global guy, right? They ship the big yellow tractors all over the world. They put a supply chain in. They make a ton of money selling replacement hoses. And once you put one of those guys in, it prints money virtually forever.
Check 1, 2.
Oh, good. I don't have to yell.
Check
Where's
1,
that
2,
voice
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Oh,
Just getting the volume right for you.
all right. Good. Now, can you guys hear me better? Good. That yelling is for the birds. So, my opinions are basically formed by, we sell computers to various industries in the United States, right? The electrical industry, the construction industry, the hardware home center industry, pharmacies, all that stuff. And you can kind of tell how an industry's doing by how many people are calling and saying, I'd like to buy a computer for my pharmacy, or I'd like to buy a computer for my lumberyard. Nobody, by the way, is calling right now and asking for a computer for their lumberyards. In fact, they'd like to return a few of them. So, we're getting questions from mid-market companies about what would you do for a system in India, or what would you do for a system more likely in China, and which tells me that people who buy our largely mid-range products, right, are thinking about, well, what am I going to do if I need to go over there? What am I going to do if I have to expand over there? So something's going on in that area. If you look at the infrastructure and logistics, I was in China not long ago, and I've been in Vietnam and Cambodia and everywhere. And they've built roads. They're able to move goods in dual semi-tractor trailers pretty efficiently. Where if I was to go back, my first trips in those kind of places, they would be rutted roads and smoking, terrible smoking trucks and stuff. It's pretty modern infrastructure stuff. And that combined with the internet and the bandwidth that they basically have available to them that's equal to what we have, they can wire their computers together, their thoughts together, their voices together, and they can move goods up and down at least the major trade routes. So the infrastructure, in my mind, has improved dramatically. I talked about content and connectivity there. Distribution and software systems, all of us, Infor, Activant, we've all invested money in making the systems have global capabilities. So, a financial package you can run in 10 different countries, a way to translate the language on the screens, obviously a way to handle multiple currencies, a way to handle multiple taxation. You see that all of us software company guys have had to invest in taking our type of customer around the world, and which tells me that our type of customer is starting to move around the world, and we see a lot of that. When I say this thing down here, it used to be all the time people would say, well, I'm going to open up a branch in Germany, or I'm going to open up a branch you hear that my whole time in the business, I've heard that. But today, we get calls about the rest of the world. And people are like, I'm going to open this thing in what's a good example? In Qatar, is that how I say it? It's spelled Qatar, I think, but pronounced Qatar. Over in the Middle East, all those kind of countries, UAE and all that stuff. We get asked about it all the time. So, if you take North America, which we're all familiar with, it's this large $14 trillion economy. America is plus 3 and 1.5 up in Canada, and another 1.5 in Mexico, for about 17. Great infrastructure, pretty much one set of regulations to adhere to, right? It's our native culture, we're used to the whole deal. What's lacking in complexity and cultural issues is the gap is filled right, but it's really a competitive market. I think distribution in America is fulfilled. There's probably excess distribution capacity here. If you go to Europe, you got another very large market, right? Really nice infrastructure. But you got, the Euro system removes some of the currency complexities and some of the border complexities, but still, you're dealing with about 50 sets of rules. So the question you ask yourself is, if you're going to go over there, is how do you cost effectively navigate all those boundaries? Because while the market itself is $15 trillion or whatever it is, each individual market that you have to tailor your services to can be a $1 trillion market. There's 55 million people in the UK, I think, something like that, maybe 80 in Germany, and it's busted up into 50 different countries. So in Europe, we've got a pretty tame situation, but a lot of complexity to have to look at. So the same thing about America. If you ask our sales guys, is there enough distribution in Europe, they'll say, yeah. It's like overrun with distributors. And they're trying to find out what to do with themselves. They talk about consolidating product lines. They talk about consolidating out vendors. They talk a lot about pushing operations down into the Middle East, because they've obviously got the time zone and the sort of logistical advantage on a company in the States going to the Middle East. And we've had to program to this. There's a ROHS. There's like, I guess in Europe, there's like this super focus on hazardous materials and how you have to document and track them and warn people before they unload the truck, warn people while they unload the truck, and just all kinds of hazmat kind of things. Big focus on that. China, I probably said a little bit of this earlier. It's a very large emerging market. I think its gross national product, you might know this, Jeff, it's about $5 trillion. Something like that. And remember, the whole thing was like 17 or 18. That's because this huge bulk of it is in Japan. Improving infrastructure, like I said, I've seen it. And I think this is, and a more uniform set of rules. It varies by country, or not country, but what do they call it over there? Territory? Province, right. You should give this presentation. But a pretty uniform set of rules, but a wholly different culture than what we're used to. And again, what everybody says is if you're going to go to China, you're going to go to China with partners. But you can't own businesses there and all that stuff. And I made this point earlier. We get calls from systems in China now that fill a pipeline of demand for systems overseas. They tend to call more than they buy, but there's a pretty good set of interest there. Rumor had it about a year ago that the Chinese economy was slowing down. That was kind of, if you read the newspaper, he would have said, it can't last forever, juggernaut, we're kind of hoping they're going to fail in a certain sense, right? And just the other day, the people who do these statistics, the World Monetary Fund, upped the prediction for China. And somebody encouraged me to tell this story, so I will. I was over there with the family, and we were in this big high-rise hotel. And down below us, next to the hotel, was a dirt street. And the dirt street sold like little bitty pink poodles and turtles and crickets in cages. They were all kinds of charms that were supposed to bring good luck and everything. And it was fascinating to go down the street with the kids and watch, the turtle would die, so they'd throw it out in the street and the cat would get it. And it was just really culturally interesting, I thought. And we were there for about 5 days. And on about the third day or the fourth day, these work guys showed up and they were digging around in the street and everything. Went down there on the final day to look at the pink poodles. The street was gone. They had, in 2 days, torn that dirt street up, paved it, put in sidewalks, and completely changed the complexion of the neighborhood. They had gentrified it basically overnight. And what you saw was, how they did that so quickly was, they had machines that were in there chewing that stuff up, and they had like 200 guys that were in there with the machines. So when you combine the technology with the labor, you could just flat move some stuff, and they were changing Shanghai before our eyes. They talk about the most common bird in China being the sky crane and all that stuff. It's true. They consume something like half of the world's construction materials. It's just booming. And they burn coal to the point of you can't see, and I have a picture on that, which is, we went to see the Three Gorges Dam. And that's the view of the Three Gorges Dam from they built a viewing platform that we're standing on. Who are they? Yeah, it was crazy. I suppose if the dam works, it'll eliminate some of that stuff, but this has got nothing to do with distribution, but they pressed charcoal into like these little lotus-shaped things with holes in the middle of them so the flames can go through, and they cart that stuff everywhere, and they burn it in their backyards, in their ovens. The whole country is like burning coal that they dig out of the mountains there, and that in combination with the particular atmosphere that they have creates scenes like this just almost every day, which is kind of sad. So in just a history, a little bit of China, coming up through the 70s and 80s and stuff, you couldn't really do business in China. And then their government decided that they wanted to open up and make some money, I guess. And they joined the World Trade Organization. And when they joined the World Trade Organization, they promised to open up the country to foreign ownership of businesses and distribution in 3 years. And subsequently, they did do that. And today, with the appropriate attention to paperwork, people can actually go do business in China, again, largely with partners. India, on the other hand, held on to their sort of closed format for a much longer period of time and didn't build the infrastructure and didn't really change. And today, if you go talk to people who hang around India and China, they'll say, oh, India. China's kind of like okay, but India is like, extremely difficult to do business in and has a much weaker infrastructure. These are just a few facts. Every time I tried to interview somebody about what's the distribution like in China, they would answer my question with an answer that led to how do you distribute goods out of China? The export focus of the society and the people who work in it is extremely high. They were manufacturing people at their heart, and now they're trying to figure out how to go ahead and do, so they don't have to sell to basically foreigners. They want to learn how to not only manufacture, but to vertically integrate and distribute and get the stuff out to the rest of the world without having to go through intermediaries. And even in China, which is why the Chinese companies are calling, they're trying to tame the cost side. You get the impression that some of the manufacturing is starting to move to lower cost countries like Vietnam and such, and that even they are being pressured to be competitive. Excuse me, competitive. And then the Chinese are looking for systems to help manage expenses. The things in red are the Epicor advertisements. I meant to take them out, but I used the wrong version. India's economy is built on services. How many people have, well, you guys know, but you outsource computer stuff to India, right? They talk about doing it to China, whereas China's economy is built on production there. And I've talked about its infrastructure. There's this big, if you read it, there's this big India laments kind of thing about how they didn't get into production, that they went strictly with the sort of the IT and outsourcing support, and they fell way behind China in terms of productivity of their factories and stuff. And I'll read the last piece. The last bullet though on the demand for India. Epicor's international group didn't really pursue India until just recently, and just now we've opened up with some partners in India. For all those people and all that consumption and all that stuff, there wasn't enough demand really to pursue business in India until just recently. So I think it gives you kind of a weighting between the two juggernauts over there. This is a picture of distribution. They don't come out very well, I'll say. Can you see the pig? That's his leg. That's two guys on a motorcycle with a giant pig between them. So that's distribution in Cambodia. That poor pig was squealing like you never heard. Yeah, it was alive. That's all. They don't have a refrigerator motorcycle. Because they could have put him in a cooler out the back. Yeah, they move everything around live because you kind of make a point, because if you kill it, it doesn't preserve itself anymore. So that's why you need a motorcycle. Get it to market quickly. Don't kill yourself in the process. So Dubai is the business center of the Middle East. If you go anywhere near the Middle East, what you want to hear is, oh, I want to move to America, which is what you used to hear like 15 years ago. Their dreams, their hopes, their aspirations were largely, I want to move to Los Angeles. It's proving they didn't really know what they were talking about. But today you go over there, and that thing that Dubai did in what would it be from like 98 to 2008, something like that, where they built flower-shaped islands and really marketed themselves well. You go to the Middle East today, and it's like they want to go to Dubai. The children of Egypt hope to grow up and live in Dubai, which is kind of different. Western business practices, Dubai, I met a guy who, his job, he was on a boat. He had his family, he was an expat. And he set up a whole business in Dubai chasing down software pirates. So Microsoft would hire him, and him and his ex-SEAL guys would snoop around the country and find out where they were like making copies of Word. And then they would actually physically assault the place and shut it, because they had, the government allowed them to police the intellectual property rules in the United Arab Emirates. And people say that you can actually do business there because the government decided we're not going to be corrupt. We're going to be, sort of the Western style operation. But based on my experience, once you leave Dubai, the brown bag, brown envelope rule applies. It seems still very, very, I don't want to say corrupt because it's culturally, I don't think it's corrupt. It's corrupt by our standards, but by their standards, it's the way business is done. And it proved to me that you can change the infrastructure a lot quicker than you can change the culture of the place. You can put in roads, you can change the laws, you can hang up internet connections everywhere you want, but their willingness to, our ability and their willingness to do business with foreigners, as they call us, is still lagging behind. That's another picture. Sorry for the pictures. I don't know why they're not loading the back of the truck, but they've got this baby loaded up here extremely high. And then I guess they're going to do something else with the back later on. That's on a street in Egypt. So everybody plans on everything taking longer. When we do an install over in a I'll call it an emerging country, you don't think about doing it in 6 months. You think about doing it in 18 months. I think we've all seen this on our travels. The apparent sense of urgency is just not the same as what we're used to. We check into a hotel here. It's like, I've been here like 17 seconds and I'm not in my room yet. And over there, you check into a hotel. It's like, maybe a 30-minute process. Not always. The Western hotels are different. But the need to maintain or watch lead times, to have more inventory, it's just not as efficient a flow of goods and merchandise as what you're used to here and in Europe. They used to be all about cheap labor. My poor pictures didn't come out at all. So I'm going to narrate again. Okay. This is a picture of a donkey pulling a cart with a turban guy in it. And then back here is probably, I don't know, $1 million worth of copper cable they're going to lay for internet connectivity. And so you got, it's supposed to be a juxtaposition. It was a good picture. It is on that screen. You got these carts rolling by while these machines are laying cable. And they're really trying to move past, the labor concept and into the sort of modern era. So this one is a comment based largely on experiences in South America. Is that when, again, based upon experience with the computers and such, it used to be that guys would be running these shops in the States and they'd be all wired together and they'd be all working as one unit, right? And then in South America, they just have another business. They just set up a whole other shop. And it'd be running in Brazil, and it would have a manager, and it would have an accounting package, and it'd have inventory, and they just ran it and they mingled it at the books somewhere at the end of the year. They ran the separate operations. Today, we see a strong demand from people who have set up shops overseas to integrate them into their core business and run them as one, multi-location, one company, one sales team, one accounting department, one procurement department, and not run them as these separate businesses individually. And one of the guys that works calls that virtualization. And we're seeing a lot of it in South America where they want to bring it inside the envelope, so to speak. That make sense? Now, my next picture's not going to be any good. But in auto parts is something I know a lot about, and hardware stores, and electrical distribution too. And you go to a city, I'll pick in central China, and you're just walking around trying to convince your wife that this is fun and and safe. And you'll come, there'll be a street, and the street will be one of our New York City blocks or whatever, maybe 2 city blocks, and there'll be stalls, maybe 8 feet wide or 6 feet wide or something like that. And this stall will sell PVC pipe fittings. And this stall will sell PVC pipe. This stall will sell adhesives. This stall will sell 15-amp circuit breakers, or residential circuit breakers. And each guy, this one will sell Toyota alternators. And when goods finally hit the street, they're not going out through through big boxes or even Ace hardware stores. They're going out one, in the hardware industry, it's called department, class, and fine line. Fine line being the smallest unit of product categorization. They're selling it by the fine line. Each merchant is a fine line as a dealer. And if you talk to them about where they get the stuff when they can talk, it's like, this stuff has gone through like 4 levels of distribution. It's somebody made it, somebody sold it to a master distributor, some master distributor sold it to some other distributor, somebody bought a container of it and hauled it out to central China, and guys at the stalls went to the container and bought 10 of them and put it in their shop and sold it. In the States, it's pretty rare to see anything beyond 3-step distribution, like auto parts would be master distributor, Java. And over there, you know, it's like there's one or two more steps after that. So if you look at that, not today maybe, but in the future, the market for mid-tier distribution that can actually fulfill that supply chain that is filled in this other manner, it's got to be there at some point in time as these places modernize. Street merchants are part of the culture. They buy from the Toyota guy because they know the Toyota guy, and they know the Toyota guy knows what alternator to put on that particular car. That's his stock in trade is he's got the Toyota alternator and he knows which one fits. And so they don't have as much information to work with. And then the other thing you see is that is the big box retailers. I don't know where you would clear the land in Cairo to put down a Home Depot or something like that. And if you could clear the land, I don't know how people would get there because it's so congested to move from a long distance away. That I just, you know, it's going to be a long time before a big box effect takes place in some of these really, really dense urban environments. So you just don't see as much of that except in the suburbs, the outlying rings. Oh, that one's blue. So this is an example of a tire dealer. You can see the tires stacked up here and stacked up over there and the oil and everything. Some distribution channel managed to get, you know, 8 tires to this guy for probably one vehicle. And that's where you go to get a new tire for a little old Toyota, which I think is pretty cool. And a nice selection of tools up here. Probably Craftsman. So there's this other effect, which is that manufacturers make stuff, right? And then they got to get it somewhere. So a lot of times when we get calls for systems, they want it to be both a manufacturing system and a distribution system because in order to expand their market beyond local situations, regional situations, they've had to become distributors in their own right. There was no, Springfield Electric to go put a sales guy in front of and get him to stock your product and sell it, beyond your local market. So a lot of the manufacturers are distributors. I think they had to do it because there was just no channel there for them. And I think a lot of times too, there was no channel conflict that was there. So again, it goes back to my mind is that the manufacturers don't seem to want to be distributors. They seem to do it because they have to do it. And there's probably going to be some emergence of, I'll say it again, mid-tier distribution in these emerging countries. Probably through partnerships. So I'm going to wrap up here and go on to a brief next section. My takeaway so far, which you guys can read as well as I, but the protectionism, the not wanting of people in the country, I think is in decline. I think you can feel it in my lifetime, so to speak. You got all of this improving infrastructure. A lot of the complexity of doing business in multiple countries has been ameliorated, made easier, made better, simplified, whatever, by the systems that you can buy now to put in place to do distribution in multiple countries. Before the Epicor transaction, when we thought international, we thought, okay, that means we're going to go do business in France and Germany. I said that earlier, right? And those guys impressed upon us. No, the word is global. And the deal is that if you're going to be a true multinational, that means you're going to be doing businesses in 30 countries, 50 countries, right? And that's not just localizing it for a few countries in Europe. You got to have an accounting package and regulatory package, and ability to change languages, and be in the product we sell primarily overseas is in 155 countries. So if a Bosch and Long wants to buy your system, the checklist isn't, do you have absolutely the best functionality? But the primary checklist is, can you be truly global? Because they'd accept lower level of functionality for the ability to put the same computer system basically anywhere they want to put the thing. And the criteria, like in the States, it's the other way. It's like, who's got the absolute best functionality? And, yeah, we need to do international. But those guys over there are like, no, how do I actually be completely, totally globally? And if I have to accept some small price and functionality, I'm willing to do that. I've spoken about the opportunity for the people in this room, not so much the manufacturer, because it was a distributor-oriented set of thinking. It's probably going to have to be looked at. What would be the ramifications of expanding by placing distribution capability in other markets? Now, I don't think today, could be today, but sometime in the next 10 or 15 years, if you look at that, the growth in those countries and the growth here and the distribution footprint here, and if you're going to look at growth, it's probably going to have to be considered to at least seriously look at some of the overseas markets, because it seems a bit underserved. The donkey said that. Okay. So I promised I would give a brief update on the Epicor merger, Activant Epicor merger, but I won't do that if nobody wants to hear anything about that. I only have 2 slides. 10 minutes? Is that what that? No, high five? You guys want me to do that? Okay. I'm not making a sales pitch. Buy an M4. I got an M4 memory stick here. I'm just kidding. The way that transaction worked is that Apax they're a big global private equity firm. In other words, they have the money to invest, quite a lot of money, and they felt that the timing was right to buy software companies, which is probably right. And so they bought Activant, which was the company I'm from. You guys know me from there. And they bought Epicor, and then they're taking the 2 companies and they're merging them into one entity. So a lot of people say, well, Epicor must have bought Activant, or Activant must have bought Epicor. Not true. A private equity firm bought both companies and merged them. We kept the Epicor name because Epicor had this worldwide brand, and trying to go out there and establish Activant as a, in Malaysia just didn't make a lot of sense. So we adopted the Epicor name, and it's a good name. Their gig, as I said, was primarily providing ERP systems for discrete manufacturing operations around the world. Sort of mid-range discrete manufacturing. They got a lot of other businesses, but that's the lion's share of it. Through acquisition around 2005 and 2006, Epicor had bought a company called CRS and a company called NBS. And the reason I mention that is because they have JCPenney's runs their point of sale, CVS uses their sales audits, Coach and Taylor. If you go to the mall, half of the stores in any given mall are running Epicor point of sale and retail systems. So I actually really work on the retail side. So now it's just cool to go in the mall and see all these stores that are running here. Activant Solutions, who I know you all know and love, made ERP systems for wholesale distribution, electrical, plumbing, industrial supplies. And then the side I'm from, we made POS systems for hardlines dealers, for Ace Hardware stores, True Value Hardware stores, lumber dealers, and all that kind of stuff. So the whole thing together into the new Epicor. It is very, it's a very nice business. We have everything from the beginning of the process in manufacturing all the way through the end sales channels and distribution, hardlines retailing, softlines retailing. So we got the whole gamut covered. Nice company. We're the 6th largest enterprise software company. There'd be Oracle and SAP, Microsoft and Sage, and then Infor and Actors. We're number 6. Infor's bigger than us. So pretty good job now. CEO is Pravesh Qureshi. He was running Activant, and our headquarters remain in Livermore, California. So the CFO is from Activant too. So that's kind of the nature of the merger. And then the way the business is structured, this is my last slide. You're supposed to do this. So the way we're running it is Paul Salzgiver, who's my boss, he's an ex-PeopleSoft guy. We have an RDG, we go with these three-letter things, which stands for Retail Distribution Group. The hardware stores, automotive, especially retailing, is all in that. We sell a product called Legal, and we have 8,000 customers. Over here is that big Softlines retail group, Retail Solutions Group, SG, apparel, shoes, department stores, end-to-end, point-to-point solutions. I'm not going to go into that, but we sell turnkey solutions that are all tied together here. These guys will buy a POS from one guy and a merchandise management from another guy, and they bolt all the stuff together. Remember that thing about master data management this morning? What a JCPenney's does, what the agony that those people suffer is incredible. They've got one database under their POS, another database under their merchandise management system, another database under their CRM system, another database under their BI, another database under their loss prevention system. And they all use the same customer. You know, they got to keep all that synced. And they've just got these huge infrastructures of trying to manage data. We don't even know what complexity is compared to what I see some of these big retailers. If you've got an Epicor system or an Infor system or whatever, you're pretty well tied together compared to what some of these guys do. Wholesale distribution, that's the old WDN division. That's the people who belong here, the Eclipse and the Profit 21 products. Kevin Roach is running that, industrial supplies, electrical supply houses, plumbing and all that. And then this last piece, which Kevin from Activant Epicor is also running, is the ERP systems for the manufacturers. So we have two EVP GMs running fundamentally retail stuff and running fundamentally production and industrial and distribution stuff. And that's the way the company's organized. Okay? Yes, Rick? Where's Vista?
Is there, Steve, is there a market intelligence capability that cuts across those verticals?
Rick works for me. Rick worked for me. Rick wants me to give a Vista pitch. Okay. This is, I'll make it interesting. We were very lucky here in that the Eclipse systems and the Profit 21 systems had enough penetration in electrical distribution, and we were able to talk to a number of other distributors who didn't have one of our systems, who had an Infor system or an Oracle system or whatever, and we were able to gather up about 80 distributors with about 2,000 branches, and every month they send us what they sold that month. We call it point of sale data. And it comes in, we go through it all and organize it into categories and such, and we produce market share reports, so we can tell, you know, Lutron what their share of what they get there? I can't say. Anyway, we can tell people their market share in the marketplace vis-a-vis their competitors, and it's all fact-based. It's a really neat product. So, okay, Rick? Okay.
Very good.
I'll take any questions anybody has, or I'll let you go to your next presentation. Your choice.
Well, I was asking Susan, so maybe I'll ask you too about the build out of more categories, because we're seeing, and I'm not managing that process any longer. It's been handed off to the people that are using the data. But there were a few categories which were good and important to us, but we have a very broad category list that we would be looking for.
This is a Vista question.
Yeah. Actually, we're cataloging and bringing in more categories all the time, and but we're not releasing them on just one by one by one. We're waiting and trying to, usually at the time when we'll bring in more distributor partners, then we'll produce more of those categories. And
so kind of in
you can
scheduled
expect
releases
to see
or
that.
whatever.
You'll expect to see a continuing rollout that'll fill in your product lines.
Yeah, we build those categories as we get manufacturing plans to buy the data, and we had a pretty good year, so you'll see more categories roll up. And if you want a complete accounting for it, we should probably do that offline, but we need to get with Scott, who produces those reports, and give you a very specific answer.
Are you producing them by UNSPSC? Is that categorical stratification you're using? And if not, why not?
I can answer your question. No. Because we produce the reports along the lines that the manufacturers want to see them. And manufacturers look at their businesses how they look at their businesses. And if you're doing market research for them and you try to tell them, no, you're going to look at it by this other way, then you're not really a candidate.
Well, how do you aggregate those across manufacturers if they're all using different categorical schemes?
We code them ourselves.
So you translate.
We translate.
Why don't you translate them to UNSPSC for them, so that maybe they'll start using UNSPSC more readily, and then they'll give them to us.
Every time I go in and set up a manufacturer, I encourage them to use the
PSC,
UNSPSC code.
right.
In general, it tends to, I mean, you can feed it back into that. But again, there's only, the UNSPSC has that coding that goes out forever.
Right.
Well, it would cost the manufacturer a lot of money to get us to do all of that coding across for every single item. Remember, we're coding
But
all
they promised
items.
to do that for us.
But we're doing all items.
No, but they promised to do all items too, so
Right.
they're gonna have it eventually. I'm just,
Eventually.
It's getting there.
But they'll say, well, we'll take 2 of them. So in general,
Yeah.
a lot of them are feeding into that UNSPSC schema, but
Right.
it's only 2 of the attributes. It may not be the whole gamut.
that only 2 pair instead of 4
Yeah,
pair. But because it's hierarchical, they can always roll it back up.
exactly.
We code it out pretty well. Depends on how you want to call it up. So I better let you guys go. Any other questions about anything? Anything? All right, thank you guys for coming very much.
But we do-